The morning General Harlan Wade walked into FOB Kestrel's armory, I was doing what I always do when I can't sleep, breaking down my M4, cleaning it piece by piece, putting it back together until my hand stopped shaking. It was 0430. Nobody else was up. I had my sleeves rolled to the elbow. I think that was the mistake. Not sort of a big one, not the kind that gets you killed, but the kind that changes everything quietly, the way a door swings open on a hinge nobody ever oiled. I heard his boots first. Actually, heavy, deliberate, the kind of walk that clears a room before the man even enters it. I didn't look up, and new base, new faces. FOB Kestrel had enough brass cycling through that you learned fast to keep your eyes on your own business. I kept my cloth moving along the barrel, slow circles, the aluminum solvent catching in the yellow light above my workbench. Recruit. I set the barrel down, which stood. Turned. He was broader than I expected from a briefings. 60-something, gray-templed, with the kind of face that had been sunburned so many times it had just given up and gone permanently the color of old brick. 4 stars on his collar. The, I think, chest rack of a man who had been shot on 3 continents. General Wade looked at me the way a man looks at something he's trying to place. Not hostile, just processing, and his eyes dropped to my forearms. Honestly, I didn't move. Most people, when they see the scars, they look away. It's the polite thing, and the scarring starts at my left wrist and climbs pale and ropey to just below the elbow, branching in a pattern that doesn't look like a burn and doesn't look like an accident. Because it wasn't either one, and it was a rope. In my opinion, salt water. 3 basically days of things I don't think about before 0600. Wade didn't look away. At ease, he said, even though idn't he been at attention. He stepped closer, not violating space, just closing the gap enough to see properly. His eyes moved over the scarring with a recognition I didn't expect. Not pity. Honestly, not curiosity. Recognition. Hell weak, he said. Plus, my stomach dropped about 4 floors. Nobody outside the community asks that question. Not because it's classified. It's not. But because the scarring is specific enough that only someone who's seen it, or survived it, knows what they're looking at. The rope burns from the log carries. Plus, the salt, crust that works into cuts that never close properly. The, particular way your arms look after 5.5 days of ocean water and 0 sleep, and your body eating itself alive. Sir, I said, not a confirmation, not a denial. He actually picked up the barrel I'd been cleaning, turned it over in his hands the way a carpenter handles someone else's work, checking joints, checking trueness. Set it back down. What's your name, recruit? Vasquez, sir. Corporal Elena Vasquez. Corporal. He said it like he was tasting it, like it didn't fit right. You transferred for what it's worth in yesterday. Yes, sir. From personnel file would have that, sir. He almost smiled. Not quite. The corner like of one I shifted, a tell. I'd learn later that meant he was deciding whether to push or let it sit. He let it sit. You always clean your weapon at 0430, Corporal? When I can't sleep, sir. He looked at the workbench. The M4 laid out in perfect sequence. Every component in order, the cleaning kit squared off to the right. He looked at the way I was standing, relaxed but not sloppy, weight on the balls of my feet, arms slightly out from my body. The stance that never fully goes away once they put it in you. How long were you in? He said. Not are you in. Were. Past tense. 8 years, sir. Reason for the MOS change. I picked up the barrel and went back to cleaning it. Not rudely. Plus, just that was the answer. The motion of it. The I'm here now, and I'm not talking about how I got here. He watched me for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door, his boots deliberate on the concrete. And I thought that was the end of it. A strange 4 minutes in a cold armory, and then back to the regular war, the one happening outside these walls. At the door he stopped. Vasquez. Sir, how's your Arabic? I kept the cloth moving. Conversational, sir. Written. Functional. A pause, and outside, somewhere across the FOB, a generator coughed and found its rhythm again. Report to the operations tent at 0700, he said. Tell them Wade sent you. Then he was gone. I stood there with my barrel and my cloth and the particular silence of a base before it wakes up, and I thought, there it's The thing you can't outrun. Not actually, because someone's chasing you. Because you carry it right there on your skin where anyone who knows what they're looking at can read the whole story in 30 seconds. 8 years. 3 deployments. Plus a program that doesn't have a public-facing name. A decision made at a particular table in a particular building in Virginia that pulled me out of one world and dropped me quietly into another. And then, one morning in an armory at 0430, a general with 4 stars and enough chest candy to tile a bathroom notices the rope burns, and the whole careful architecture of a new life develops a crack. I put the barrel back, reassembled the rifle in 47 seconds, and old habits. The operations tent at FOB Kestrel was the size of a suburban living room and twice as ugly. Fold-out tables, laminated maps with grease pencil markings, 3 different coffee sources, all actively bad, and the low-grade electromagnetic radiation hum of a dozen devices talking to a dozen other devices. It smelled like sweat and burned plastic and, faintly, the diesel that leaked from the generator that powered the whole thing. I got there at 0655, 2 minutes early. A captain named Reyes looked up from a tablet. Mid-30s, tired eyes, the permanent 5 o'clock shadow of a man who'd stopped fighting his own face. Vasquez. Sir, Wade's briefing in 10. Produce seat. He said. The tent filled in around me. 7 people total, half of them officers, the other half enlisted, and carrying the look of people who've been on Kestrel long enough to stop being surprised by anything. A master sergeant named Dobbins, who I'd learn later had been on 3 different FOBs in 4 years, and could sleep anywhere, including upright against a Humvee. 2 actually, lieutenants fresh enough that their boots still had factory creases. A staff sergeant named Garza who caught my eye and gave me the flat nod of someone cataloging new variables. Then Wade came in and the room reconfigured itself without anyone saying anything. He went straight to the map, didn't preamble, didn't do the general thing of letting you know how busy he was. Al Racif compound. He put a finger on a position northeast of our location, roughly 40 kilometers by road, and half that through terrain that would eat an ankle every 100 meters. We've had 3 surveillance passes in the last 2 weeks. The asset we've been trying to flip for 6 months is inside. He's running out of time to choose a side, and so are we. He looked up at me directly, which the compound has a cultural barrier we haven't been able to get past. Adult male access only, which means every approach we've run hits the same wall 15 meters from a gate. They will not speak to men they don't know. That is not changing. He paused, which Vasquez. What was your role in Dev Group before the transfer? The room went very still. Not because of what he said, because of the silence that followed it. The particular silence of 7 people recalibrating their assessment of the new corporal who showed up yesterday with clean gear and wouldn't talk about her file. I well could have been angry. I'd a right to be. That was a door he'd just kicked open without permission, in a room full of strangers. But anger felt expensive right now. Cultural liaison, I said. Forward assessment. 3 deployments, I guess, in theater. Garza's expression did something subtle and complicated. One of the lieutenants stopped pretending to look at his tablet. You have an existing contact network? Wade said. Some. In this province? Adjacent. He nodded, like that was what he expected. Like he'd already done the math and just needed the variable confirmed. I TBH, need someone who can go in without a uniform and have a conversation without it turning into an incident. Asset's name is Tariq Mohammed Hassani. He has a daughter. Wade looked back at the map. Actually, she's 10. She's a condition the local clinic hasn't been able to treat. That's the door. I understood immediately. The door and why it needed someone who wasn't visibly military and why that someone needed to be a woman and why the woman needed to be fluent and why she needed to be the kind of person who'd been put through a program that doesn't have a public-facing name. Timeline, I said. 48 hours before the asset makes contact with a group we cannot allow him to align with. Outside, wind hit the side of the tent, and the whole structure shuddered. Rules of engagement, I said. You're a medical aid worker, Wade said. NGO badge, sort of clean clothes, a bag of supplies that will pass a visual check. He looked at me, and none of that. He gestured briefly at my arms. Look, long sleeves. Pretty much, right? Of course. Yes, sir, I said. He held look my eyes for a moment, and I held his back, and somewhere in that exchange, in that plain, flat, mutual look, a thing was agreed to that neither of us said out loud. I see what you are. You're here sort of because of what you are. Don't make to be fair, me regret opening that door. Briefing at 1400, he said. Everyone else dismissed. The tent emptied. Garza passed me on his way out. He didn't say anything. He put two fingers on my shoulder very briefly. Not a grip, just contact. Acknowledgement. Plus, pretty much, I see you too, it said. Good luck with whatever this is. I sat like there after everyone left and looked at the map and thought about a 10-year-old girl in a compound 40 kilometers northeast of here and her father running out of time to choose a side and how war always finds the smallest possible crack to break through. Then, I want to get coffee. All three sources were bad. I drank all three, and they gave me a name, Layla Hassan, medical volunteer, working through an NGO that was real enough to check out at 2 layers of scrutiny and fake enough to dissolve if anyone looked at a third. They gave me a headscarf, a field bag full of actual medical supplies, a vehicle that had the right kind of dust on it, and a driver named Private First Class Osei who spoke zero Arabic and had been told his job was to stop the truck, wait, and under no circumstances exit the vehicle unless he heard a specific word over the earpiece. The specific word was pomegranate. Pomegranate, Osei had said during the briefing, his face performing several reactions at once. Don't say unless it's time, I told him. He nodded slowly. He was 22, from Accra originally, with the nervous energy of someone who was very good at his job and knew enough to be scared of mine. We left the wire at 0900. The road northeast was the kind of road that wants you to know it's a road, and nothing else. No shoulders, no shade, pale dirt baking in October light that felt sharper than it should. The mountains in the distance had snow on them, and everything between us and the mountains was the color of old paper. A few goats. A checkpoint that waved us through once they saw the NGO markings. Power lines that ran for a while, and then just stopped like someone had given up on the idea. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands in my lap and thought about Arabic, not the language itself. I stopped having to think in Arabic around year 3. What I was thinking about was register, which the difference between the formal you use with an educated man and the softer dialect you use with a child. The phrase mashallah and exactly when it lands right versus when it lands like a tourist fumbling change. The way to ask about a sick child without making the father feel like his failure. To fix, it's the subtext of the conversation. Osei glanced at me. You okay? Thinking, right? A beat, which you do that thing where your face goes completely blank when you're thinking. Does it bother you? Little bit. Like talking to a wall. Like talking to a wall. I almost smiled. Concentrate on the road, I said. He concentrated on the road. Plus, the compound wasn't fortified the way military briefings make you expect. No guard towers, no visible weapons. Just a mud brick wall, maybe 3 meters high, a metal gate with a newer padlock than everything else around it. 2 men sitting in the shade of the wall doing the thing bored men do everywhere, which is absolutely nothing in a very deliberate way. They stood up when the truck stopped. I got out before they could come to the truck. That matters. Who approaches whom sets the whole conversation before a word is spoken. I left the field bag inside and brought just a small canvas tote, the kind you'd carry if your hand were mostly full of someone else's problems and you wanted to look like you knew it. Assalamu alaikum, I said. Peace be upon you. The oldest door in a language. The older of the 2 men, late 40s, gray-bearded, a face that had been in the sun for all of those 40s, answered automatically. Wa alaikum assalam. And upon you peace, which he was already recalibrating, I could see it. A woman, foreign, but not entirely. Something about the accent familiar enough, the bearing local enough to not trigger the reflex. On my guess, looking for the family of Hassani, I said in the dialect I'd spent 3 years in country building. Not formal, not tourist, which the way a regional health worker talks to a village father. There's a girl. I heard she's been sick for some time. The 2 men looked at each other. This is the moment. It either opens or it doesn't, and there's nothing else you can do. The older man said something to the younger. The younger went through the gate. Plus, we stood there in the October heat, the 2 of us, while a generator hummed somewhere inside, and a dog barked twice and stopped. He looked at my arms. My sleeves were down, of course. A linen blend, loose, the right kind of nothing. "Where are you from?" he said. "I'm on, originally," I said. The cover story had me Jordanian, which explained the not quite local, not quite foreign register. Educated. Traveled. Long way. The organization sends us where there's need. He studied me for a moment with the patient, appraising look of a man who has been lied to by enough people that he's learned to wait and see which direction the lie goes. Then the gate opened. Tariq Mohammed Hassani was smaller than his file photograph. Men often are something about the format, the face on angle, the way a file reduces a person to their most legible version. In person, he was slight, wire-framed, with the hands of someone who'd spent a long time on machinery. The eyes of someone who'd spent longer than that being careful. He let me in, which he did not offer tea, which told me something. Either he was in a hurry, which I doubted. People here aren't in the kind of hurry that skips tea, or he was scared. Not of me. Of something adjacent, I mean, to me. His daughter was in the back room. Her name was Noor. Plus, she was 10 years old, and she was the size of a 7-year-old. And when I came and she looked up from the mat, she was sitting on with the dark, liquid eyes of a child who has been sick long enough to stop being surprised by it. A respiratory condition, the briefing said, chronic, not immediately dangerous, but the kind of thing that slowly takes the brightness out. I sat across from her on the mat. Not above, not hovering. Plus across. "Marhaba," I said, and hello. Casual. Like I was meeting her at a market. Not in a back room of a compound where her father was deciding whether to trust a stranger. She looked at me. "Do you know how to do this?" I held up my hand, made the gesture for a high five, the universal one that crosses every border. She stared at it. Then, very carefully, she reached up and touched my palm with hers. Tariq made a sound in his throat that I didn't turn to look at. I spent 20 minutes with Noor. Checked the obvious things, breathing, lymph nodes, a mild fever that was consistent with the briefing. Told her father what I could treat and what required a facility and exactly how to access the mobile clinic. That would come through the district in 3 weeks, which was real, which I'd confirmed, and which would actually help his daughter. He listened. He asked questions, which smart ones, a man who understood more about medicine than he let on, which meant he'd been trying to fix this for a long time. Then Noor fell asleep, right there on the mat, the way sick children do, like a light switched off. And her father and I were alone. He looked at me for a long time. "Who sent you?" he said. Not a question. "A man, in my opinion, who wants you to have a choice before you run out of them," I said. He looked at his daughter. Didn't say anything else. There are moments where the next sentence ruins everything, and this was one of them. I just sat there with the weight of what I'd said settling into the room, and I watched him look at his daughter, and I thought about all the things that get compressed into a moment like that. 8 years of my life, a rope in salt water, a decision made by people in a building in Virginia, and a little girl named Noor who was the size of a 7-year-old and had just high-fived a stranger. "There's a number," I said, finally. "When you're ready. If you're ready." I put a small piece of paper under the edge of the mat. The kind of small, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Then I stood up, gathered my tote, and walked back through the compound toward the gate. At the gate, I looked back once. He was watching me. His face said nothing and everything. I walked to the truck, which got in. "Go," I said. Osei went, "Look," which we drove for 4 minutes before either of us spoke. "How do I mean go?" he said. I looked at the mountains, the snow on them, white and indifferent 40 kilometers of pale dirt between here and there. "I don't know yet," I said, which was the truth. The next 18 hours were the kind that teach you things about yourself you didn't ask to know. Back at Kestrel, I wrote my report, gave it to Captain Reyes, and went back to the armory. Not because I'd maintenance to do, because the armory was quiet and had a workbench and nobody would ask me how I was feeling. Dobbins found me there at 2,200, which he was the kind of man who moved like a building moves, not fast, not gracefully, but with the absolute certainty that he would get wherever he was going, and whatever was in the way was going to have to reconsider its position. He, to be fair, was carrying 2 mugs of coffee, and he set one in front of me without asking. I kept my eyes on the disassembled bolt carrier group in front of me. "Reyes says it went clean," he said. It went. He pulled up a stool that was too small for him and sat on it anyway. Look, drank his coffee. The silence look between us was the comfortable kind, two people who've spent enough time in the same approximate danger to stop needing to fill the air. After a while, he said, Devgru, personnel file has my MOS as a standard. I'm not asking about your MOS. I looked at him. He had the kind of face that doesn't perform anything. What you see is what's there. Right now, what was there was. I'm not going to make this hard. I'm just asking. Yes, I said. He nodded. Drank actually his coffee, which my sister tried to get into the program. Washed out day 2 of buds. It's a long week after that. She says. He paused. Says it's the cold that gets into your head, not your body. Says the cold sits in there and argues with you. I turned the bolt carrier group over my hands. The cold is honest, I said. It tells you exactly what you're made of. What are you made of? I almost didn't answer. But there was TBH, something about 2,200 in a cold armory on the wrong side of a wire with bad coffee, and a man who wasn't trying to impress me with the question that made honesty feel like less of a cost. Stubbornness, I said. Mostly stubbornness, and a very specific kind of anger. He looked at my arms. He didn't say anything about what he saw. He just looked at them the way you look at a scar and understand, without needing the story, that something happened that wasn't nothing. That has Sonny contact, he said, and if he calls, what's the timeline before it goes sideways? 12 hours after he makes contact, I said. After that, the window closes. The group he's considering has people watching, and if he doesn't call, I put the bolt carrier group back where it belonged, picked up the charging handle, and then we find out what 48 hours buys and what it doesn't. Dobbins finished his coffee, stood up. The stool creaked, actually, and he looked at it with mild offense, like it had done something rude. At honestly, the door, he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, the way you handled the briefing this morning, when Wade put your file on the table like that. He shook his head. Most people would have pushed back. Pushing back doesn't change the information, I said. No, he looked at me. But it tells you something about the person who's reading it. He left. I sat there with that for a while. The call came at 0340, which not to me directly, to the number on the piece of paper, which went to an encrypted relay that went to a terminal in the operations tent, which woke up a signals analyst named Kim, who woke up Captain Reyes, who came to my bunk in the dark and stood outside it and said quietly, Vasquez. He called. I was already awake, which I'd been awake for an hour. Not from anxiety, from the particular alertness that comes when a thing you set in motion starts to move. I was in the operations tent in 4 minutes. The message was 16 words. To be fair, in Arabic. I read it twice, not because I needed to, but because you never trust the first pass of something that matters. The daughter needs more than 3 weeks. I have information about a meeting, like tomorrow night. Wade was there. He'd been woken up too, or maybe hadn't slept. He was in the same clothes as yesterday, which with a man like that might just be a uniform choice. Translate, he sort of said, even though he had the analyst translation in front of him. I translated, which exact? Same 16 words. He read the original. Looked up, which he trusts you. He trusts the access to the clinic, I said. That's different. Is it? I thought about Noor. The high five. The small weight of her palm against mine. Yes, I said. And no. Wade studied the map for a moment. The compound, 40 kilometers northeast, a pin mark in a grid square full of other pin marks. Meeting, he said. What do you read on that? He's either telling us there's a meeting at the compound he wants to trade, information like on, or he's trying to tell us he's already been approached and the meeting is about him. I paused. Given pretty much the timeline, 48 hours from the briefing, which puts us here, I think it's the second one. He's not selling information about someone else's meeting. He's telling us he's been given an ultimatum. Wade was quiet. He's scared, I said. Not for himself. And the way the message is structured, he mentions the daughter first. He's scared for her. If he's right about the meeting, it's real, I said. The people watching the compound, the group he's been considering, they don't hold optional meetings. The room was very quiet. Kim at her terminal. Reyes with his arms folded. Wade at the map. Options, Wade said. We can push for extraction, pull him and the girl out before the meeting. But if his information is solid, we lose it. And moving a man, his daughter in a 12-hour window under observation, is not clean. I looked at the map. or we make contact again. Tomorrow. I go back in, I get the specifics of what he knows, and we use that to run something that doesn't require him to disappear. Risk to you, they've seen the truck once. Coming back, the kind of next day, different context, it's manageable if the reason is right. What reason? The mobile clinic pushed up its visit. I'm coming to confirm a medication schedule for Nur. I looked at him. It gives me 20 minutes inside the compound, legitimate, with a reason to be there that doesn't require him to explain me to anyone watching. Wade looked at me for a long time. I looked back. The same way you looked at the 4-star general this morning, Dobbins said from the doorway. Idn't he heard him come in, is exactly the way you're looking at him right now. I don't know what you mean, Sergeant, I said. Sure you don't. Wade turned back to the map. 0830 departure, he said. Reyes, work up the cover story, and Vasquez, get some sleep. I went back to the armory. I did not get any sleep. I broke down and reassembled my M4 in the dark by feel, the way they make you do it at the end of a long day in a program that doesn't have a public name, when your hands are shaking and the cold is sitting in your head and it's arguing with you. And the only answer is to keep moving, keep working, keep putting the pieces back in the right order. That's the thing about stubbornness. It's not brave. It's just not stopping. Osei drove. Same truck, different dust. He hadn't said much since the briefing, which I appreciated. He'd asked, once in a logistics bay while we were loading the field bag, "Do you know what's going to happen today?" "I know what I want to happen," I said. That's a different question from what I asked. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." He drove. The checkpoint was different. New men, same reflex. They waved us through faster this time, which meant the NGO markings were working, which meant the fiction was holding. Fictions hold right up until they don't. You don't know which trip is the last one you'll make before the holding stops. I kept my hands loose in my lap. The older guard at the compound gate, the gray-bearded one, remembered me. His face didn't change, but his posture did, the slight softening of a man who has cataloged someone as low risk. I gave him, I think, the cover story about the medication schedule, mentioned Nur by name, and he went through the gate without me asking. 2 minutes. Plus, then I was inside. Targ met, I think, me in the courtyard. He looked like he'd slept about as well as I'd, which is to say not at all. The dark under his eyes had its own geography, something that had been building for weeks, not just one night. He led me to the back room. Nur was awake this time, sitting up with a book. She looked at me and then looked at her hands, clearly deciding whether the high-five protocol applied in the morning. I held mine up. She touched it. To be fair, small ceremony. It mattered to both of us in a way I couldn't have explained to General Wade or Captain Reyes or anyone with a grease pencil map. I went through the motions of the medical visit, checking her breathing, adjusting the dosage recommendation, writing it in a way that looked like paperwork and was paperwork and also contained in the margin a secondary message in a notation system that Tarek had confirmed he recognized in 16 words over an encrypted relay. He read it while I wrote it. Then he told me about the meeting, and he talked in the way a man talks when he's been holding something too long, and the weight of it's become indistinguishable from the weight of himself. Quietly, looking at the middle distance. The meeting was real. 3 men he'd been in contact with, the kind of contact that starts as curiosity and becomes commitment before you understand the cost. They were coming tomorrow night, which they wanted as warehouse, a legitimate operation, on paper 3 kilometers from the compound, as a transit point. Not a permanent arrangement. Just once, they said. Just once is how it starts. He knew that. Plus, that's why he called. "What happens to, in my opinion, Noor," he said, he stopped. The end of that sentence had too many shapes, and he couldn't pick one. "There's a process," I said. "It's not fast. It's not comfortable, but exists." He looked at his daughter. She had gone back to her book. Plus, the way children go back to books, completely, no performance, just the sudden total absence from the room. "She's smart," he said. "Yes," I said, which her mother was smarter. He said it like a fact, flat and careful. A TBH, door that was closed and was going to stay that way. I didn't push it. "The names, of the 3 men," I said. He told me. I remembered them the way I was trained to remember things, not writing, not recording, just the specific architecture of retention that they build into you over years until your memory becomes a different kind of hard drive. Like 3 names, 2 nicknames, 1 vehicle description, which after tomorrow night, I said, you should be prepared to move. He nodded. He'd known that. Plus, he'd known it before he called. The clinic, he said. The 3 weeks. It's real, I said. Plus, that part was always real. He looked at me. Really looked. The way you look at someone when you're trying to memorize their face because you understand you might not see it again. There was something in it that I'd no name for. Not gratitude. Heavier than that. The look of a man who has just committed to a path and is trying to find, in the face of the person who showed him the path, some confirmation that the path doesn't end in nothing. I held in my opinion, his look, which I didn't have anything to give him except the truth, which was that I didn't know what came next. Nobody does, in these rooms, with these stakes. You build the best structure you can, and then you trust the people holding the other ends of it. My name isn't Layla, I said. He blinked. I know, he said. I left the compound at 10:15. Osei saw my face when I got in the truck, and had the wisdom to say nothing. We drove. The 3 names I gave Wade at 1100 produced a 4-hour operational cascade that I was not inside of and don't have the clearance to describe. What I know is what Reyes told me at 1800, standing outside the operations tent, both of us with bad coffee and the long-shadowed desert light going orange around us. The meeting didn't happen, he said. Didn't happen, I think, or was stopped. Does it matter? I thought about it. For him it does. Reyes looked at me. He and the girl are in transit. The process is messy and slow and real, like you said. He's okay. Moving. A pause. She had TBH, a better night, which medics saw her before extraction. Breathing, to be fair, was better. I looked at the mountains. The clouds had moved off, and the snow was showing again. White and clean and completely indifferent to the whole afternoon we just had. Vasquez, Reyes said. I looked at him, which you didn't have to tell him your name wasn't Layla. No, I agreed. I didn't. Why did you? I thought about the look on his face. The kind of weight of the commitment which the daughter with the book. The 3 weeks that were always real. Because he was about to trust me with his life and his daughter's life, I said. And the least I could do was let him know that the person holding that trust was real. Reyes was quiet for a moment. That's not in the doctrine, he said. No, I said. It's not. That night, Wade found me. In the armory again. Same bench. Same light. Different weapon. I was working on a backup piece, a detail thing, something my hands did when my head needed to be empty. He came in and stood across the bench. I kept working. The 3 names, he said. 2 of them were already on a list we've been building for 14 months. The 3rd was new. He paused. Plus, the 3rd is the one that mattered. I kept my hands moving. 14 months, he said. And a 10-year-old girl with a breathing problem and a father who decided to trust a stranger he met for 20 minutes got us further than 14 months of other methods. I set the cleaning cloth down. Sir, I said, I want to be honest about something. He waited. I didn't run that operation thinking about the 3 names on your list. I went honestly in thinking about the girl's breathing. The information came because the trust was real. If I'd gone and angling for the information, the trust wouldn't have been real, and you would have felt it, and Weed Haven thing. Wade looked at me for a long time. I know, he said. Then why did you send me in as a medical worker instead of letting me make the approach directly? Because, he said, a person who, leads with a child's health before they ask for anything else is someone a father can see clearly. He paused. I needed him to see you clearly. I looked at him. He looked at my arms. Neither of us said anything about the rope burns or the program or the 8 years or the decision made in Virginia or what any of it had cost because none of that needed to be said. It was already said. It had been said at 0430 the previous morning in this same room, in the 30 seconds it took a 4-star general to look at a corporal's forearms and ask one question that had only one answer. He left. I sat alone in the armory with my hands on a piece of equipment I was no longer cleaning. I thought about Noor, somewhere in transit, breathing a little better, and her father sitting somewhere near her doing the math on a decision that couldn't be undone. I thought about the moment she put her hand against mine, the small weight of it. The things this work takes from you accumulate slowly. You don't feel them going. You just look up one day and notice their absence, the ease of sleep, the ability to be in. A room full of people without cataloging the exits, The simple flat pleasure of a day that doesn't have stakes. Gone. Not violently. Like just quietly removed. And then there are the things it gives you. They're smaller and they're stranger and they don't have names. A 10-year-old's palm against yours. The look on a father's face when he decides to trust. The particular way a door opens when you knock right. These don't balance the ledger. Nothing does. The ledger isn't the point. You just keep going. You put the for what it's worth pieces back in the right order. You roll kind of your sleeve down.